Her only son sued her for psychological coercion. His wife filmed a podcast calling her a narcissist. They lived in her guest house for free until Rose said one word: enough. She didn't scream. She filed. Now her home shelters women they tried to erase. And her grandson? He still calls her grandma, quietly, proudly. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The Sunday light in Santa Fe had that warm, amber tint that made everything look more peaceful than it actually was. Rose Holloway stood barefoot on the brick balcony, a vintage teak tray in her hands, balancing 3 champagne flutes and a crystal pitcher of orange juice. She still remembered the exact day she'd commissioned that balcony railing, curved wrought iron with a saguaro motif, back when she was still practicing architecture and believed beauty should outlast bitterness. Brandon and Avery were already seated at the table she'd set. Brandon wore aviators, though the sun hadn't risen past the roofline. Avery had that cool, over-moisturized glow that made her look perpetually like she was posing. They sat across from each other, phones next to their plates like extra utensils. Rose poured the mimosas with practiced elegance and slid into her seat, linen napkin already folded on her lap. Her grandson, a curly-haired 2-year-old, sat in a booster beside Avery, banging a plastic spoon against the table rhythmically. No one tried to stop him. "So," Avery said, clearing her throat and adjusting her oversized sunglasses, "we've been thinking a lot about family structure." Rose's stomach knotted, not because of what was coming, but because she already knew. When people said, "We've been thinking," they usually meant, "We've decided." Brandon chimed in, voice syrupy. "We want to do what's best for all of us, especially the little guy." Rose said nothing, just raised her glass and took a small sip. It tasted off, too much Prosecco. Avery set her own drink down untouched. "We're envisioning a family model," Avery continued, "that doesn't center elders." The words fell with the weight of something pre-rehearsed. Not spontaneous, not kind, not even masked in empathy. Just cleanly sliced, like cold deli meat. Brandon shifted in his seat, as if trying to soften the blow that had already landed. "You'll always be loved, Mom. That's not a question. But it's time to step back." Rose tilted her head slightly. "Step back from what, exactly?" They both paused. Even the toddler stopped drumming. From what? From her own home? From the garden she'd tilled every spring since the Reagan administration? From the antique dishes she'd inherited from her mother, which Avery had recently labeled vintage clutter? From cooking every dinner? From wiping yogurt off her grandson's cheek when Avery scrolled Instagram during meals? No one answered. Brandon rubbed the back of his neck. "We just feel like it's healthier if we all had a little more independence." Avery nodded eagerly. "Boundaries are love." Rose reached for the tea kettle she'd brought out after the mimosas. She poured herself a cup, steam curling softly. Her hands didn't shake, but her silence filled the space like pressure before a monsoon. "Of course," she said finally. "Boundaries." The toddler resumed banging. Somewhere down the hill, a neighbor's wind chimes picked up a breeze. No one mentioned that it was her set of chimes. Brandon had moved them to the far end of the yard last week for feng shui. Rose set her tea down, carefully picked up the empty mimosa glasses, and placed them back on the tray. The clink of glass on glass was the only sound. Brandon started to speak again, but she raised one hand gently, not in defiance, but in quiet closure. "I'll get these rinsed," she said, voice even. "Let me know if you need anything else today." As she turned toward the kitchen, Avery's voice followed her. "We're not trying to hurt you. We just want to do things differently." Rose didn't turn back. "I know," she said. "That's why it's going to work." She walked inside and let the screen door close behind her, soft but final. In the hallway, past the photographs Avery hadn't yet taken down, she pulled open a drawer in the sideboard and took out her old legal pad, the one she hadn't used since her retirement. The cover was slightly bent, but the paper inside was crisp. At the top of the first page, in slow, neat letters, she wrote, "Modern Family Log, Entry 1. The scent hit her before she even entered the living room, something citrusy and artificial, like a hotel trying too hard. Rose stepped around the corner and froze. Her gallery wall was gone. In its place, 3 oversized canvas prints of beige feathers and 1 abstract smear of navy across cream. The family photos, vacation snapshots, Brandon's kindergarten graduation, the black and white of her and Robert on their wedding day, were gone, leaving faint dust outlines and tiny nail hole that now felt like puncture wounds. "Oh!" Avery called cheerfully from the dining area, barefoot and dressed in a linen jumpsuit that made her look like an anthropology exhibit titled Minimalist Motherhood. "You're home! Thought I'd surprise you." The living room felt a little heavy. Rose looked toward the mantel. The antique clock was missing, so was her grandmother's ceramic duck. "I stored the old stuff in the garage, labeled everything. Don't worry, nothing's broken." Rose walked slowly toward the couch, her hand grazing the now empty shelf beside it. The sunlight, which usually warmed the room with amber calm, now bounced sharply off the white-on-white decor like it was trying to find a place to land. "I didn't realize we were redecorating," she said finally. Avery chuckled, breezy. "Not redecorating, refreshing." The energy was a little stale. Stagnant chi. Rose didn't respond. She walked to the kitchen. There, too, things had shifted. Her spice rack was gone, the copper kettle replaced with an electric water boiler. The ceramic rooster that once sat proudly by the window vanished. On the counter sat 3 matte gray jars labeled grain, root, and snack. Her dishes, patterned porcelain with delicate scalloped edges, were gone from the cabinets. She found them boxed in the garage, each plate wrapped in newspaper, stacked beside her unused snow boots. On top of the box was a sticky note in Avery's looping handwriting, "Vintage. Let's preserve." Later that afternoon, Rose sat at her kitchen table. Still. She stared at the empty wall across from her, the one that had once held a carved wooden clock that chimed at the hour, every hour since 1982. Brandon walked in, brushing crumbs from his shirt. "Oh, hey, I meant to tell you," he said, voice overly casual. "We're thinking we'll do Thanksgiving this year." Rose blinked. "You mean here?" "Yeah, Avery's already got the vision board going. We'll take care of everything, don't stress." She pressed her palms flat to the table. "We've hosted Thanksgiving in this house since your father built the extra dining bench. It fits 12? "Exactly," Brandon said. "Perfect for our guests." Rose bit the inside of her cheek. "Guests," she repeated softly. That evening, while she tried to read in the den, the toddler padded in, sticky-fingered and holding a half-eaten banana. He stood in front of her, silent for a moment, then said, "Hi, Miss Rose." She looked up. "Sweetheart, I'm your—" "Miss Rose," he repeated, giggling. From the hallway, Avery's voice floated in. "We're shifting to more neutral titles. He'll decide what feels right when he's older." Rose didn't answer. She simply reached over and wiped banana from his chin with the edge of her sweater sleeve. The next morning, she tried to approach Avery. Just a conversation over coffee, she told herself. They stood on opposite sides of the kitchen island, the new marble trays between them like borderlines. "I think we should talk," Rose said gently. "It feels like things are changing very quickly, and I'd like to be included in—" Avery held up a hand, perfectly manicured. "Rose, this is exactly the guilt stuff we're trying to unlearn. We're drawing healthy boundaries, okay?" Rose nodded once, slowly. "Of course." "Thank you for understanding," Avery said, already turning back to her phone. That night, after the house had quieted and the baby monitor glowed faintly in the guest house window, Rose returned to her drawer and pulled out the legal pad. Modern Family Log, Entry 2. Photos removed, dishes boxed. Thanksgiving overtaken, new title, Miss Rose. Energy refreshed, equals me erased. Guilt equals silence, boundaries equals borders. She capped her pen and paused. Then, she drew a line down the page, firm and deliberate. On the right side, she wrote, "Response options." She only filled in one. Observe, record, reclaim. The folding chairs appeared on the lawn like mushrooms after rain. By the time Rose spotted them through her kitchen window, there were a dozen. carefully arranged in a half-moon shape, facing the rose trellis she'd planted 20 years ago with her late husband. A collapsible table had been draped in a linen cloth and topped with mason jar smoothies, small succulent favors, and a stack of printed worksheets. She hadn't been asked, not even a courtesy text. Rose stepped outside with a basket of laundry tucked against her hip. The toddler was in the sandbox, unsupervised, chewing on a green plastic shovel. Avery, in high-waisted jeans and a wide-brimmed hat, stood near the trellis rehearsing something under her breath. By 10:15, a stream of women began trickling into the backyard, young, eco-chic, pushing strollers and balancing stainless steel water bottles. Avery greeted each one with a hug and that half-whispered voice she used when she wanted to sound enlightened. No one looked at the kitchen window. No one asked whose home this was. Rose folded towels in the den. Each flick of the fabric felt deli, berate, methodical, something real amidst the curated chaos outside. She could hear Avery's voice carrying in, "We're not raising children, we're raising sovereign beings." She kept folding. That week, 2 different friends from church texted her, asking if she was all right. "Haven't seen you at potluck? Everything okay?" "Missed your cornbread Sunday. Hope they're not working you too hard." She started typing replies. Deleted them. Sent back heart emojis instead. By Wednesday, she noticed something new. The electric bill came addressed to Brandon Holloway. Same for the water. And gas. All still debited from her account, but his name sat on top like a new label slapped over hers. She stood at the kitchen counter, flipping through the bills, when Avery walked in mid-sentence. On speakerphone, naturally. "I just think if someone's retired, they should act retired. It's weird to keep pretending they're in charge of things just because they're older." The caller laughed, low and echoey. "You mean like toxic family hierarchy?" Rose turned and Avery, startled, clicked the phone off without looking embarrassed. "Sorry," she said, then added with a tight smile, "just having a convo about generational healing." Rose nodded, slowly, then reached for her phone and set it on the counter, screen down. She didn't say a word. Avery reached into the fridge, pulled out Rose's last jar of apricot preserves, and walked out chewing a slice of gluten-free bread. That night, Rose sat on the edge of her bed, the ceiling fan clicking above her. Her phone buzzed, a photo message from her neighbor Lenora. It showed Avery in the backyard, mid-lecture, gesturing dramatically in front of the trellis. The caption read, "Is this your new side hustle?" Rose didn't laugh. She just saved the photo. The following afternoon, while Avery scrolled Instagram and Brandon paced on a work call, Rose sat on the patio with the toddler. The boy, barefoot and shirtless, darted toward the edge of the rock garden and fell. The scream wasn't loud, but it was sharp. Knees bloodied, palms scraped, he wailed on the gravel. Avery didn't move. She was busy filming a reel. Rose rushed forward, lifted him gently, and brought him inside. She ran warm water, dabbed at his cuts with soft pressure and murmurs. He quieted in her arms, face pressed into her shoulder, still hiccuping. Avery walked in, phone still in hand. He needs to learn how to fall. That's how resilience is built. Rose didn't look up. She wrapped the bandage anyway. That evening, after everyone had gone to bed, Rose pulled open the bottom drawer of her filing cabinet. Behind a stack of architectural journals and a dusty box of receipts, she found it. The lease. 3 pages. Stapled, with both Brandon and Avery's signatures in blue ink. Signed 6 months ago under the heading Guest House Residency Agreement. She had added it quietly just in case. She slid the lease into a manila folder, labeled it Legal. Then, she opened her phone. She pressed play on the recording. Avery's voice filled the room. "I just think if someone's retired, they should act retired." Rose tapped the screen, paused it, then opened a secure cloud folder and uploaded the file. She exhaled slowly. Modern Family Log. Entry 3. Backyard Event. Unauthorized utility names changed. Toxic Hierarchy Lecture recorded. Toddler injured, comforted lease found, secured legal folder created. She added one last note beneath it. When a matriarch is made invisible, she learns to become silent and sharp. The knock wasn't a knock, it was a slam. Rose barely looked up from her mug of black coffee. Morning sun streamed through the kitchen window, catching the tiny swirl of steam rising from her cup. Brandon's footsteps stormed down the hallway, heavy and rapid, and then her door burst open. He stood in the threshold, fists clenched around a piece of paper, red-faced and breathless. "What the hell is this?" She didn't flinch, just took another slow sip. "An eviction notice?" he barked. "From you? Are you serious?" She set the mug down with deliberate care. "I assume you read the lease before reacting." His face twisted. "You're actually trying to throw your own family out?" Rose reached beside her, lifted a folder from the chair and opened it. She slid a stapled, signed copy across the table like it was a dinner menu. Brandon glanced down at it, jaw twitching. "You both signed it," she said. "You agreed to a 6-month temporary residency with a month-to-month clause. It's been 7. He stared at her, stunned. "We have a toddler, Mom." "Yes," she said, "and he deserves stability, which I intend to provide, just not through enabling 2 grown adults playing house in someone else's." A voice behind Brandon chimed in, sharp and theatrical. Avery appeared in the hallway, silk robe cinched tight. "You're unbelievable. You're actually evicting your grandchild?" Rose stood now, calm but taller somehow. "I'm evicting you." Avery laughed bitterly. "Oh, we'll go public with this. Trust me, people will be horrified to hear how you abandoned your family. Elder shaming is real, and we'll tell the whole story." Rose moved toward the drawer near the stove, opened it, and pulled out her phone. "Should I send them the recordings now, or wait until you go public?" Avery's mouth parted. Just for a moment, her eyes flinched. "Recordings?" Brandon said, squinting. Rose tapped the phone screen. "Of your financial games, her hierarchy lectures, even that workshop you held in my backyard without permission." Avery's voice lowered. "You're trying to destroy us." "No," Rose replied. "I'm trying to reestablish myself. There's a difference." Brandon threw his hands in the air. "You're choosing pride over family." She looked at him evenly. "I'm choosing peace over performance." They stood in the kitchen, 3 feet of tile between them, but a canyon in spirit. Avery crossed her arms. "We'll fight this." Rose turned back to her coffee, took a sip, and said over her shoulder, "Then I suggest you start packing early. Because as of the 1st of next month, all utilities will be transferred or shut off. You'll need your own accounts." Brandon's voice cracked. "We're your blood." "Exactly," she said softly. "So you'll survive. You just won't do it here." There was a silence then, thick, heavy, and almost sacred. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere in the house, a cartoon theme song began playing faintly from the guesthouse monitor. Avery's expression hardened. "You've changed." Rose turned and smiled, not kindly, not cruelly, just real. "I've finally stopped apologizing for not being what you imagined I should be." She picked up her coffee again and nodded toward the door. "Close it on your way out. I'm not done reclaiming my morning." They left, murmuring angrily to each other down the hall. Only when the house fell silent again did Rose sit down and open her legal pad. Modern Family Log. Entry 4. Eviction issued. Lease referenced recordings, acknowledged utilities, cut off scheduled emotional manipulation, deflected boundaries, reinforced. She stared at the final line she'd written, tapped her pen twice, and then underlined it. Peace is a decision, not a reward. Just then her phone buzzed with a new email. Subject: Brand Partnership Proposal. From Avery Holloway, PR. Rose didn't open it. She just turned off her phone and poured herself a second cup. The post went live at 6:42 a.m. Rose knew because her phone buzzed incessantly on the nightstand, jolting her from sleep. She didn't reach for it right away. She lay still, listening to the wind tick through the cottonwoods outside her window, the familiar Santa Fe hush before sunrise. She already knew what it was. By the time she sat up and pulled the phone to her lap, the screen was lit up with chaos. Avery Living Official had posted a carousel, a photo of her holding the toddler with tearful eyes, a black and white shot of a packed suitcase beside a children's toy, and a final slide with text in soft cursive over a sage green background. Sometimes, family fails you, but healing doesn't stop at blood. The caption was longer than the post itself. Words like abandoned, gaslit, elder wounds, and intergenerational trauma blinked back at Rose like neon signs trying to sell something broken. Modern family values, respect, goes both ways. Healing out loud, Rose read every word, twice. Then she clicked on the comments. Some were furious, calling her selfish, cold, a boomer villain straight out of Central Casting, but then something shifted. Replies began pouring in from women with gray avatars and real names, not handles. Women who used punctuation, whose bios said things like teacher, retired, or grateful grandma, and their tone wasn't rage, it was recognition. My daughter did this to me. They move in and call it grace, then strip everything from you. Love without respect is just emotional labor. By 10 a.m., the post had over 8,000 comments, and the tide was turning. Rose made tea. Strong, black, no sugar. She brought it into the sunroom and opened her laptop. She stared at the cursor for a long time. Then, she clicked open her email and typed a name she hadn't in nearly 15 years. Marisol Haynes, features editor, the Santa Fe Sentinel subject. Still here. Marisol replied within the hour. They met for lunch the next day at a small cafe near the library Rose once helped design. Sleek adobe curves with a skylight atrium she'd fought city council over back in 2003. Marisol hugged her tightly. I've been following that post, she said, sliding into the booth. And then I saw your name in the comments, low-key, but there. I'm not here for payback, Rose said, stirring her tea. I just want the dignity of my silence to be respected, and maybe for someone else out there to feel a little less erased. Marisol nodded. You mind if I quote that? The op-ed went live 3 days later. Respecting elders is not regressive. Why boundaries go both ways. It was smart, elegant, sharp without being cruel. It told the story without naming names, but everyone reading knew exactly who the piece was about. And suddenly, the internet wasn't on Avery's side. By the following week, 2 of her brand sponsors, one organic skincare, the other a baby gear company, released statements saying they were reevaluating partnerships in light of community response. Her once glowing comment sections were now tangled with sharp questions and sarcastic memes. Grandma Gate, Miss Rose, deserved, better, peace over performance. Rose didn't gloat. She went to her garden, pulled weeds from the edge of the path, and replanted marigolds. She let the wind hum through her chimes without speaking over it. She made lemon bars and dropped a tin off at Lenora's without saying why. But the silence didn't last. Brandon showed up at her back door the next evening, eyes tired, shoulders slumped like a boy who'd been sent to apologize by a teacher. Mom, he said quietly, can we talk? She let him in but didn't offer tea. He sat at the kitchen table, folding and unfolding a paper napkin. We're drowning, he said. Avery's getting death threats. Brands are cutting ties. I lost a consulting gig this morning. Rose waited. I'm asking, could you issue a statement? His voice cracked. Just something saying you support us, or that this is a misunderstanding? Rose walked to the counter and opened her legal pad. Modern Family Log. Entry 5. Hashtag campaign launched comment section. Divided then shifted. Journalist contacted op-ed published brands disengaged. Brandon returns request for PR cover. She turned to him, eyes clear. I supported you for 38 years, she said. I designed a life for you, room by room. What you're asking for now isn't support. It's erasure, again. He looked down. You want me to apologize for reclaiming my house? She asked. He said nothing. Rose closed the pad. You'll survive this, just like I survived raising a man who can't say sorry. She stood. Let yourself out. He did. But as the door clicked shut, her phone buzzed again. This time, a message from someone she hadn't heard from in decades. Marisol, you have more letters coming in than the Sentinels had in 6 months. Dozens asking if you'll speak again. Would you? Rose stared at the screen. Then she picked up her pen and drew a single checkmark beside her last line. The notary arrived at exactly 9 a.m. Rose greeted her with fresh coffee and a stack of neatly clipped documents waiting on the sunroom table. The woman flipped efficiently through the pages. Trust paperwork, asset schedules, homestead clauses, successor trustees. "Everything in your name?" the notary asked, glancing up. Rose nodded. "Irrevocable. Every brick, every nail, every inch of the land." The woman signed, stamped, and handed back the pen. "Congratulations, it's fully yours now." It always had been, but now it was untouchable. By noon, Rose had changed every lock on the property: front gate, garage, guest house, even the crawlspace access Brandon had used once to run a questionable Ethernet cable. She shut the side gate that separated the main house from the guest unit and installed a sliding deadbolt on the inside. Avery pounded on it within the hour. "Why is this locked?" she shouted. "Brandon's clothes are in there." Rose looked up from her weeding. "That's not my concern anymore. This space is being reassigned." Avery stared at her. "To what?" But Rose simply dusted her gloves and returned to her rosemary. That evening, she sat at her desk and compiled a package for Gloria, her attorney. It included 3 flash drives, one with audio files, one with annotated expense records, and one with a video showing Avery berating a neighbor over parking while the toddler stood unsupervised nearby. She slid them into a padded envelope, added a typed letter titled "Timeline of Misuse and Abuse," and sealed it shut. 2 days later, a call came from a woman named Trinity over at Solace Works, a local housing nonprofit. Lenora had passed along Rose's name. "We heard you're evicting some family and reclaiming a guest house," Trinity said with a slight laugh. "Any chance you'd consider converting the unit into transitional housing for displaced women? You'd be fully in charge, of course. We just help coordinate and screen applicants." Rose looked out the window. The garden was blooming in cautious yellows. The trellis stood empty. The patio chairs, once claimed by parenting circles, now collected pollen. "I'd like that very much," she said. Brandon and Avery received the formal court eviction packet the following Tuesday. It arrived in a heavy envelope, handed directly to Brandon by a uniformed officer. The seal was unbroken when he stormed back into the main house. "You're escalating this?" Rose didn't look up from the plans spread across her drafting table. A sketch of the guest house sat under her hand, marked with ideas: storage nook, kitchenette upgrade, reading alcove. "You chose escalation," she said. "I'm just finalizing the consequences." "This is cruel," Avery hissed, materializing behind him. Her voice trembled in that performative way she used when angling for sympathy. "We're a family." "No," Rose said. "We were a convenience, and now we're a boundary." "You're going to kick your own grandson out?" Brandon asked, stepping forward. Rose stood and faced them both. "He will never remember this house as a place where his parents were victims. He will remember it as the first house that ever protected a woman from being erased." Brandon opened his mouth to retort, but a knock interrupted him. A sheriff stood in the doorway, calm, unbothered. "Just observing," he said. "I'll be around until move-out day. Court-ordered peacekeeping." Avery stared at him, stunned. "You brought in law enforcement?" "I brought in clarity," Rose said. "Something this house has been missing." She picked up her sketch and slipped it into a folder marked Project Reclaim. Brandon watched her, hollow. "What is this? What are you turning it into?" Rose smiled then, small, knowing. "Something that belongs to women who value space they didn't have to manipulate to get." He blinked. "What?" "I'm turning the guest house into transitional housing," she said plainly. "You're not being displaced. You're being replaced." They didn't respond, couldn't. Behind them, the sheriff cleared his throat gently. "Might be time to step outside." As they turned and walked out, slow, shocked, stunned, Rose sat down and opened her legal pad. Modern family log. Entry 6. Trust secured. Locks changed. Sheriff arranged. Evidence submitted. Nonprofit partnership confirmed. Court eviction served. Unit designation. Transitional housing. At the bottom of the page, she wrote, "They wanted to redefine family, so I redefined home. Then she flipped to a clean sheet and drew the floor plan again, this time in ink. The moving truck arrived at 8 a.m., engine idling in front of the gate like it was waiting for permission to cross a sacred threshold. The crew, 2 men in Navy uniforms, quiet and efficient, stepped out and began unloading cardboard wardrobe boxes and dolly carts with smooth, practiced motion. Rose watched from the porch, arms folded, a soft scarf around her shoulders. She had prepaid, pre-scheduled, pre-labeled everything they would need. Avery had not come out yet. Brandon stood in the doorway of the guest house, pale and bleary-eyed, cradling the toddler against his chest like a shield. The boy had juice stains around his mouth and confusion in his eyes. A cartoon still played on the portable tablet behind them, its chipper theme song clashing with the tension in the air. The movers nodded politely to Rose. "We'll start with the nursery items, if that's all right." She nodded once. The boxes marked Holloway Side Unit. They know what's theirs. Inside, Avery was losing her grip. She'd dragged a kitchen chair in front of the guest house door and wedged herself between it and the frame, one arm blocking the threshold like she was the last standing member of a resistance no one had joined. "You can't make me leave," she hissed when the sheriff approached. He was the same calm, broad-shouldered man from the week before. "Mrs. Holloway has a court order," he said gently, "and you've had 10 days' notice. This isn't a surprise. It's just enforcement." She shook her head. "This is harassment." "No, ma'am," he replied without changing tone. "This is a move-out day." 2 more officers stepped forward, not aggressively, just present. The chair was moved. Avery cried, but no tears came. Her phone was in her hand the entire time, screen open to Instagram Live, but she wasn't recording. Brandon stood off to the side, slouched, useless. When the last of the bags was loaded onto the dolly, he finally turned toward Rose. "I thought you loved me," he said, voice hoarse. "I really did." She looked at him, her face unreadable. "I did," she said, "and I still do. But love without respect is just performance. This," she gestured to the locked gate, the moving truck, the blank-eyed toddler clutching a worn blanket, "this is real." He nodded once, defeated. The toddler whimpered in confusion. Rose stepped forward, her scarf trailing slightly in the breeze, and crouched in front of him. He looked up at her with wide, wet eyes. "Miss Rose?" She smiled softly. "You're a very brave boy," she whispered, brushing his curls off his forehead, "and this isn't your fault." She kissed him gently, once, on the temple. He leaned into her just for a second, then Brandon scooped him back up. As the truck pulled out of the driveway, a quiet theater of witnesses emerged. Neighbors, peeking through blinds, standing behind porch railings with mugs in hand. No one spoke. No one waved. The truck turned at the end of the block. Avery didn't look back. Rose remained at the top of the steps until the rumble of the engine faded completely. Then she walked inside. The door clicked shut behind her, softly, but with finality. The house exhaled. It was in the stillness that she noticed it first. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was restored, honest. She set her scarf on the coat rack and moved through the hall slowly, trailing her fingers across the smooth wood of the banister. The scent of lemon oil and old pine drifted up. No scented candles, no manufactured feng shui. Just her home, finally breathing its own air again. In the den, she picked up her legal pad. Modern Family Log, Entry 7, movers arrived. Resistance, expected, subdued. Final words exchanged, child acknowledged with love, departure, complete house, returned. At the bottom of the page, she drew a small square, a symbol for home maybe, or maybe just a window. Inside it she wrote, "You can lose people and still reclaim yourself." Just as she closed the notebook, her phone buzzed. A text. From Trinity. "Ready to start construction next week?" Rose looked out the window toward the now empty guest house. Her answer came not with words, but with the faintest, most resolute smile. The last of the baby furniture was stacked neatly at the edge of the driveway. Crib, high chair, a box of plush animals missing half their fur. Rose watched as the charity truck pulled away, the driver offering a respectful nod before closing the tailgate. No drama. No spectacle, just a quiet transfer of things that no longer belonged here. Inside, the guesthouse walls were bare again. And somehow, even in their exposed state, nails visible, smudges where shelves once clung, the space felt cleaner, not emptier, lighter. She stood in the center of the room, palms on her hips, head tilted back. The afternoon light filtered through the tall side window, throwing patterns across the floor. It reminded her of her old drafting studio in Tucson, before Robert, before Brandon, before the idea of sharing her home had come wrapped in emotional IOUs. The next day, Lenora arrived with a thermos of sweet tea and 2 paint rollers. Behind her came Camille from church, whose laugh could peel wallpaper, and Margaret, who once ran her own antique bookstore before her arthritis forced retirement. All 3 women rolled up their sleeves without preamble. "You're in charge," Lenora said, handing Rose a clipboard. "But we've brought opinions." "Perfect," Rose replied. "I've missed strong ones." The 4 of them worked with the unhurried rhythm of women who no longer needed to impress anyone. They painted the walls a warm, bone white, soft, welcoming, timeless. They scrubbed baseboards and repotted the dusty succulents Avery had left to die. They ripped out the plastic floating shelves and rebuilt real bookshelves with pine from a local lumber yard. And through it all they laughed, not performatively, not for show. Real joy, the kind that grows from survival. At one point, Rose stepped into the closet to sweep and found an old portfolio wedged between 2 folding chairs and a broken ring light. She carried it to the table, unlatched the cover, and pulled out a sketch. A blueprint of her own house, drawn in thin graphite lines. Her own handwriting in the corner, R. Holloway, Final Revision, 1997. She framed it, not for memory, but for evidence. A week later, a college intern named Eli showed up. He was 21, earnest, and had been sent by Trinity's nonprofit as a logistics liaison. His hoodie said UNM Architecture, and his laptop had a cracked corner held together with duct tape. "I know your work," he said, nearly tripping on the porch step. "They studied one of your adaptive reuse libraries in our first-year studio." Rose raised an eyebrow. "Which one?" "The Mesa Hill rebuild. The skylight rotation was genius." She let him in. Eli helped her take fresh photos of the renovated guest house. He showed her how to write a short bio for the nonprofit's tenant listing site. He even made a Google Calendar for guest turnover coordination. She pretended not to be impressed, but updated her printer driver just in case. They brainstormed names. Eli suggested the Holloway house. "No," Rose said after a moment. "Not house. That sounds like somewhere people just pass through." She looked out the window, toward the small, flowering bush they'd planted the day the painting was finished. "The Holloway cottage," she said. It felt right. Later that evening, she sat with her legal pad and a fountain pen. A new page, new handwriting, modern family log. Entry 8. Baby items donated. Guest house painted. Rebuilt sketches recovered. Intern connected. Eli new listing created official name, the Holloway cottage. Then she opened a separate envelope from her safe, a document she hadn't touched in 2 years. Her will. She read through it slowly, red pen in hand, made 3 notes, scratched out 1 clause, added a new line beneath real property and named assets, to be transferred in full to the Women in Design Mentorship Foundation upon death, signed, dated, sealed. She stared at it for a long moment, then tucked it back into the safe. On her way to the kitchen, she paused at the framed blueprint. Light hit the graphite lines just right, casting faint shadows against the mat. "Still strong," she murmured, and then her phone buzzed. New voicemail, unknown number. She didn't recognize it, but she pressed play. A boy's voice came through, soft, unsure. "Hi, Miss Rose? Grandma, I hope it's okay to call you that. I remember the lemon cookies and the stars on your ceiling." The message ended with silence. Then, "I miss you." The legal summons arrived, folded in a faux leather envelope, too elegant for what it contained. Rose read the claim twice before setting it on the counter, her jaw slack but unshaken. Brandon had filed a civil suit accusing her of elder psychological coercion, alleging she'd manipulated them out of residency through emotional volatility and public defamation. He used words like forced isolation and conditional housing. Avery's name wasn't listed as a co-plaintiff, but her fingerprints were everywhere. That same day, she launched a podcast titled Breaking the Matriarchy. The cover art was a filtered photo of her in a peasant blouse, crying gently into a microphone. The first episode was titled Surviving the Narcissism of Niceness. Within 48 hours, Rose's inbox filled with anonymous hate. DMs called her toxic, cold, generational poison. Her address was posted in a comment thread, then deleted, then reposted. Lenora came over with cinnamon scones and 2 bottles of wine. "You want me to go online and set the record straight?" Rose shook her head. "Number, that's exactly what they want. Noise." Instead, she called Gloria. They met in her home office 3 days later. Rose laid out everything, printed screenshots, flash drives, labeled folders of expense tracking, even a physical notebook with Avery's handwriting from her minimalist workshop plans. Gloria took it all in, flipping pages without comment, her eyes sharp behind thin gold frames. "You've got receipts," she said finally. "We just need one more thing to flip this from nuisance to exposure." She opened her laptop and clicked through a folder Brandon likely never expected to be reviewed, joint expense reports from the months they lived on Rose's property. And there it was. 5 transfers from Rose's account to a consulting services business registered to Avery's LLC, amounting to nearly $18,000. Rose blinked. "I didn't authorize those." Number. "But he had digital access. You gave it to him last spring, remember? When you thought he was helping you go paperless." Gloria leaned back. "This isn't a family dispute anymore. It's financial abuse. We go public with this in court. It changes everything." The date was set for the hearing, a public docket, no shielding under private arbitration. The courthouse in downtown Santa Fe would host it, a Spanish-style building with sandstone steps and big wooden doors that held the echoes of decisions generations deep. The morning of the hearing, Rose laid out her outfit with care. Dark green linen, structured but soft. The same color she'd worn the day she received her architectural license in Albuquerque, decades earlier. She pinned on a simple brooch, Robert's initials carved in brass. Eli, the intern, had offered to drive her, but she declined. "I built this foundation," she said. "I'll walk across it myself." Inside the courtroom, Avery sat on one side with a fresh blowout and podcast-branded merch. Brandon beside her, in a charcoal blazer that still couldn't make him look like a grown man. His eyes flicked toward Rose only once. She didn't return the look. Gloria opened with her usual grace. Facts, not flair. Clear dates, supporting files, screenshots time-stamped and printed. The judge, a woman in her 60s with a silver bob and zero tolerance for posturing, listened closely. Then came the twist. Gloria handed over a file labeled Unauthorized Transfers. Attached, the spreadsheet, the bank's verification, and Brandon's own email confirming Avery's strategic rebranding initiative. "You used your mother's funds," Gloria said, "without consent, to fund a business that now publicly labels her as psychologically unsafe." The courtroom went still. The judge's brow lifted. "Did you think those transfers wouldn't be traced?" Brandon looked like a man slipping off a cliff. Avery's face, for the first time, lost its performance polish. Rose said nothing. She didn't need to. The judge banged her gavel once. "Counterclaim approved. Plaintiff's suit dismissed with prejudice. A formal inquiry into financial misconduct will follow." Brandon stood. "Your Honor, please, that wasn't—" "Sit down, Mr. Holloway," she said. "Your mother gave you shelter. You gave her theft." Court adjourned. Outside, the sun was high and the adobe steps radiated warmth. Rose stepped into the light, back straight, heart steady. Her phone buzzed. New voicemail. Marisol. "Rose, can we talk? NPR's interested. This story's bigger than Santa Fe now. You ready for a microphone?" 3 days after the hearing, the judge's written opinion was posted online. It wasn't just a dismissal, it was a reckoning. The official statement used words like exploitation, unauthorized financial access, and malicious public mischaracterization. Brandon was fined $14,500 in restitution, payable directly to Rose, and ordered to complete a financial ethics course within 60 days. Avery's name was mentioned twice, both times in the context of coordinated brand engagement, a euphemism for self-promotion at someone else's expense. By noon that day, her podcast's largest sponsor, an organic wellness drink company, pulled support mid-episode. The audio cut off abruptly around the 20-minute mark. The replacement message was simple: "This content no longer reflects our values." Rose didn't post anything about the verdict. She didn't gloat. She spent the next morning deadheading tulips along the front walk, watering slowly, careful not to drench the roots. There was something sacred about doing small things after surviving big ones. Just after lunch, a young woman from KQNM, a public radio station in Albuquerque, arrived on her porch with a portable mic kit and a trembling voice. "My producer said I'd be talking to the woman who restored the guest house and the silence," she said. "I didn't even know what that meant until I got here." Rose gestured to the swing. "You want to sit?" They didn't talk about lawsuits. Not directly. Rose insisted on that. "I don't believe in revenge as a destination," she told the mic softly. "I believe in boundaries as architecture. If you can't build them, someone will move into the unfinished parts of your life and claim them." They spoke for 20 minutes. No drama, no backstory theatrics, just Rose's even voice and the soft clink of wind chimes overhead. The story aired the next week under the title, "The Quiet Woman Who Fought Loud Entitlement." It was elegant, measured, radiantly ordinary. By the end of the day, her porch had 3 letters slipped beneath the door. By the end of the week, she'd received over 30, handwritten, typed, folded into torn greeting cards. Some were short. "Thank you for saying it without yelling." Others bled with grief. "My daughter hasn't spoken to me in 2 years. I made her a home. She made me invisible." One note was from a man in Utah who had been living in his garage while his son renovated the main house, in a way that didn't include elders. Rose read every word. Then she stacked the letters in a cedar box and placed it near the door, beneath the coat rack. That Saturday, while Rose sat in the porch swing, watching the dusk stretch long over the sidewalk, 2 women paused in front of her gate. They didn't wave. They didn't speak, but one of them, maybe in her late 60s, raised her phone and took a photo, not of Rose, but of the porch itself. Rose didn't move. She just watched them walk away. She glanced down at her lap. Her hands were steady, her breath calm. She turned to the small table beside her and flipped open her legal pad. Modern Family Log. Entry 10. Verdict received, restitution ordered, podcast sponsor, pulled radio interview, completed broadcast impact, national letters received, 34 porch, renamed by strangers. At the bottom of the page she wrote, "The space I reclaimed is now a signal, let it echo." As the streetlights flickered on, and a moth tapped gently against the porch lamp, her phone buzzed again. A text. From a new number. "Hi, I think I found your address. Can I come by next week? I want to bring cookies this time. B." She stared at the screen, then set the phone down without replying. Not yet. She wasn't done defining her own pace. It was just after noon when Rose stepped onto the school grounds. No RSVP. No warning. She wore a long navy sweater, a pair of clean flats, and carried Harold and the purple crayon tucked under one arm. The front office aide glanced up, then did a double take. "You're Rose Holloway," she said. "I'm here to read." The woman smiled slowly. "You're on the OK list." A few minutes later, she was led through a hallway painted with handprints and alphabet murals, until they reached the kindergarten room with the rainbow door. The aide knocked, and the teacher opened it with that mix of mild surprise and practiced composure. "Miss Rose," the teacher said softly, "we'd love to have you." The kids were mid-snack, apple slices and graham crackers scattered across tiny desks. Her grandson was near the window, head tilted curiously. His eyes widened when he saw her. He didn't call out. He didn't run. But he smiled. That was enough. Rose sat in the reading chair. The book cracked open with that comforting, dry paper sound that every former teacher and grandmother knows by heart. She read gently, the room leaning toward her like flowers to light. When she finished, the teacher asked the children to clap. Her grandson clapped hardest. Then, without ceremony, Rose stood and handed the book to the teacher. "For your classroom library," she said. "Thank you." As she stepped into the hallway, a woman leaned against the tile wall outside the art room. She had streaks of gray in her ponytail and a kind of tired pride in her stance. "You're the one from the article," she said. "About the house." Rose nodded once. "I suppose I am." The woman looked down at her shoes. "You made a lot of us feel less crazy." "Thank you." Rose didn't respond right away, just met the woman's eyes and held them. "You're not crazy," she said at last. "You were just too quiet for too long." Later that week, Rose spoke at a gathering hosted by the Santa Fe Senior Empowerment League, 20 folding chairs in a community center multi-purpose room that still smelled faintly of pancake breakfasts and acrylic paint. Her speech was short, 4 minutes. "I used to think survival was silence," she told them. "But sometimes peace isn't passive. Sometimes it's structured, named, protected, like a roofline you design to hold the weather, not just wait through it." People applauded, some with tears. A woman in the front row took notes on the back of a voter registration card. Afterward, Trinity approached her with a clipboard and hopeful eyes. "We want to make Holloway Cottage the model for our long-term stabilization initiative," she said. "Training, gardening, wraparound care. We'll fund half. All we need is your blessing." Rose looked at the photos on the proposal. Smiling women, small, welcoming rooms. "No revolving door," she said quietly. Trinity blinked. "Sorry?" Rose looked her in the eye. "No tenants who call this temporary. I want people who are ready to root, not rent." Trinity nodded slowly. "We can make that happen." That evening, Rose sat alone in the guesthouse kitchen. The light bulbs were warm now. Not the harsh daylight LEDs Avery had insisted on. On the counter sat a vase of cut peonies from Lenora's garden, a welcome mat that read, "Come as you are," and a folder labeled Mentorship Framework, Draft 1. She opened her legal pad. Modern Family Log. Entry 11. School visit. Completed story time. Welcomed recognition. Hallway stranger. Speaking event. Attended nonprofit proposal. Offered terms. Roots only. She paused, pen hovering, then wrote beneath it, "Peace isn't soft, it's sturdy, and sometimes it knocks back." Her phone buzzed again. A new photo had been texted from an unknown number. It was a drawing, childlike, in crayon, of a house with a yellow roof, a big tree beside it, and a small woman on the porch holding a book. The caption, "Grandma's house." No name, no sender. But Rose smiled and saved it anyway. The ribbon was deep maroon, elegant, not flashy, and stretched across the porch steps of what was once the guest house, now painted a soft, hopeful white. The words Holloway Cottage were engraved into a cedar sign above the door, hand-carved by a local artist and stained the color of desert clay. It was late morning. The sky was clean and blue. Trinity stood beside Rose holding the ceremonial scissors with both hands like they were something sacred. A modest crowd had gathered, neighbors in sun hats, city workers, nonprofit partners, and 3 women already matched to move in by month's end. 2 of them held hands. One wept openly before they even cut the ribbon. Lenora passed out lemonade. Camille wrangled a mic from the folding table and handed it to Rose with a wink. Rose stepped forward. No notes, no script. She placed one hand lightly on the railing she and Margaret had repainted just 2 months earlier. She looked out at the quiet street, the open faces. Then she spoke. "This house was once used to erase me," she said. "Now it restores." Silence followed, not out of discomfort but reverence. Then came the applause, slow at first, then warm and honest, the kind that fills space without needing to dominate it. In the front row, a woman in a navy pantsuit stepped closer. "You probably don't remember me," she said. Rose turned. And then she did. Dr. Anita Schaefer. her first mentor from the architecture program at UNM, white hair now. But the same firm posture, the same eyes that had once told a 22-year-old Rose, "You design space like you know how it feels to be denied it." "I heard," Anita said simply, "and I wanted to see it for myself." Rose took her hand, pressed it between both of hers. "It's good to see you," she said, voice thickening. "It's good to be proud of you," Anita replied. Rose laughed softly. "You were always proud of me." Anita smiled. "Now it's public." They stood side by side for the next half hour as guests wandered through the newly finished rooms, warm-toned linens, donated art, tiny nameplates above each bed that read, "You are not temporary." Eli had printed them himself. He now hovered near the Wi-Fi router, nervously checking the network speed, flushed with purpose. Rose stepped out onto the porch again for air. She took in the view, garden beds freshly mulched, a painted bench under the apricot tree, the soft sound of wind through the newly hung chimes. And then she saw him. Near the edge of the small crowd, standing beside a tall woman with a clipboard and a school ID badge around her neck, was her grandson. He wore a button-up shirt slightly too big for him and held a folded piece of paper in both hands like it might fly away. His feet shifted. His eyes scanned. He spotted her. Rose didn't move. He did. He stepped forward slowly. No prodding, no stage management. The teacher didn't follow. When he reached the bottom of the steps, he didn't speak. Just looked up at her, brow furrowed like he was trying to remember something exactly right. And then he mouthed it. "Hi, Grandma." Rose's breath hitched. She smiled, small, sturdy. She mouthed back, "Always." No performance, no cameras. Just a single, silent exchange that undid the architecture of a lie and replaced it with something real. He didn't climb the steps. He didn't need to. He turned, walked back to the teacher, and took her hand. Rose watched them go until they disappeared past the curb. Then she turned to the door, where 3 women waited with tote bags, eyes wide, hearts ready. She opened it. "Welcome home," she said. It had been months since Rose had opened the app. The icon, green and white, soft-edged, sat untouched on her phone like an old invitation she'd chosen not to answer. That morning, though, something nudged her. Not pettiness, not pride, just clarity. She stepped out onto her front porch, coffee in one hand, and took a photo. The swing, the chimes, the yellowing leaves scattered across the welcome mat. Nothing posed, nothing filtered. She posted it with a caption that simply read, "Still standing." Then she set her phone down and watered the rosemary. By noon, the post had been shared over 1,000 times. Comments rolled in like tide water, gentle, persistent, filled with recognition. "Thank you for reminding us quiet is not the same as weak. You've done more with your porch than influencers do with entire brands." "My mom cried when I read her this caption." Avery, never one to leave a spotlight unchallenged, posted the same day, a filtered photo of her in soft, natural light, reading a self-help book on a yoga mat. The caption was long. Again. Something about growth, cycles, and the difficulty of mourning narcissistic wounds when those wounds come from people you once lived with. It landed like a whisper in an empty auditorium. One comment, then none. Someone responded with a gif of Rose's porch. By the next day, Avery's follower count had dropped by 6,000. Brandon, in contrast, didn't post. He sent an email. Subject, "You win." Body, "We were wrong. We're broke. If you can help, do. If you can't, we understand." B. Rose read it twice, then opened a new draft and typed only this: "Not every door leads back." She didn't sign it. That afternoon, she took a walk downtown. Her scarf knotted loosely at her neck, and stopped at the sandstone courthouse. The same one where Brandon's case had unraveled. The same bench outside where she'd once sat watching the light catch in the adobe grooves. Inside, the clerk recognized her. "Miss Holloway," she said, "how can we help today?" Rose handed over a sealed manila envelope. "I'd like to formally seal the prior suit records. Public copy redacted. I've donated the rest to a legal archive." The clerk raised an eyebrow. "No press?" "No ghosts," Rose replied. As she walked back into the sunlight, her phone buzzed again. A new email. Subject: Invitation to speak from UNM School of Architecture. Dear Ms. Holloway, we are honored to invite you as this year's keynote speaker at our spring graduation. Your story has been shared in every studio course this semester, not as scandal, but as structure. You showed us what a boundary looks like when it's drawn in foundation. Would you consider joining us? Rose stopped walking. Her scarf fluttered slightly in the breeze. She tapped the screen, reread it, then smiled. Her porch wasn't just a symbol, it was a stage. That night she sat at her kitchen table with a cup of mint tea and her legal pad. The pages were nearly full now, the ink darker near the margins where she'd lingered too long on some words. Modern Family Log. Entry. 13. Porch post. Published online response. Grounding Avery's spiral. Unnoticed. Brandon's ask. Declined legal record. Sealed college invitation. Accepted. At the bottom, she added, Closure isn't silence, it's structure. Then she flipped to a clean page and, for the first time in months, wrote not a log, but a title. Speech Notes, Commencement 2025. And beneath it, in large, clear script, a house is not a home until its walls say enough. Just as she capped her pen, another message buzzed. It was a photo. Her grandson again. He stood on a classroom rug holding a cardboard sign shaped like a house. Inside he had written in shaky pencil, My grandma builds homes that don't hurt. No hashtags, no captions, just healing, handwritten. The sketchbook had dust on it, not much, but enough to mark time. Rose pulled it from the bottom drawer of her old drafting desk and ran her fingers over the embossed leather cover. Inside were blank pages and possibility. She sharpened a pencil and began drawing. Not grand homes, not ambitious renovations, just one small outline, 420 square feet, single-slope roof, triple insulated windows, radiant floor heat. An accessible ramp curved like a quiet smile around the front porch. She wrote at the top, Tiny Home Prototype 1, Aging in Place. The lines came easier than she expected. Her hands remembered how to move with intent, not apology. 2 weeks later, a knock at her door interrupted a second drawing, this one with garden boxes built into the siding and a skylight over the reading nook. It was Eli, flanked by a young woman in wide glasses and a denim jacket stitched with patches of old city maps. This is Yasmin, he said. She's in her last year at UNM and begged to meet you. She wants to design housing for displaced elders. Yasmin held out a hand. I read your NPR transcript 3 times. It's the first thing that made me want to stop sketching buildings and start designing safety. Rose smiled. Then let's get to work. That week, they spread blueprints across the kitchen table. Yasmin made notes in the margins. Rose adjusted doorframe widths. They tested flooring samples, ran slope angles, debated color palettes like they were solving national policy. By the third sketch, they gave it a name, the Reclaim Series. Not revenge homes, not statement builds, just spaces that knew how to hold their residents instead of displacing them. You think people will fund this? Yasmin asked one afternoon, brushing graphite from her wrist. They will, Rose said, once they understand the difference between shelter and sovereignty. Outside, the guest house stood steady, no longer transitional, but foundational. That weekend, Rose invited a local muralist to paint the back wall. It wasn't large, just 10 feet wide. She didn't want something angry. No flames, no fists. Instead, the artist painted a blooming tree growing from the outline of a house. Roots extended like veins beneath the windows. At the center of the trunk, carved into bark, a door cracked open, light pouring through. It was titled, Begin Again. On Rose's birthday, a square envelope appeared in the mailbox. The handwriting was uneven, the stamp half peeling. Inside, a folded card made from construction paper. Stickers lined the top. The message inside read, Happy birthday. You're my favorite house. Love. B. No return address, no parent signature, just a heart drawn in the corner and a tiny scribbled sketch of a swing. Rose placed it on the mantel beside her oldest blueprint and poured herself a glass of hibiscus tea. The windows were open, the air was soft, As twilight dipped across the yard, she stepped outside with a blanket draped over her shoulders and walked the length of the garden. Her footsteps crunched lightly over gravel as she passed marigolds, thyme, and the last of the basil. At the back fence, weathered, sun-bleached, she paused. There, half hidden beneath ivy, were the initials she and Robert had carved the summer before Brandon was born. R+R, always. The carving had faded, but the grooves were still deep. Rose ran her fingers along the lines. She smiled. "Still ours," she whispered. Above her, wind stirred the apricot tree. The porch light flicked on behind her, casting long, familiar shadows. She turned, eyes steady, breath deep. Not alone, not erased, rewritten. The will took her 3 mornings to revise, not because she doubted her choices, but because she measured every clause the way she once measured joist gaps and beam loads, with precision and weight. Each sentence bore the shape of the woman she had become. Her home, she wrote, would transfer upon her death to the Holloway Foundation for Creative Resilience. Its purpose, to shelter women rebuilding their lives through art, design, writing, or silence. A home, not a program, not a recovery point, a place to live and mean it. She initialed each page, pressed her signature at the bottom, and sealed it in an envelope marked, "For After." Then she turned to the camera. The small tripod stood steady on her drafting table. The light through the lace curtains gave her face a soft glow, unplanned but somehow fitting. She pressed record and leaned forward. "If you're watching this, I'm gone," she said with no tremble in her voice. "But I want you to know this house wasn't built for regret. It was reclaimed for truth." She paused. "I hope you know how much you were loved. Even when I couldn't protect you from the noise around us, even when I had to protect myself from the people raising you." A small breath. "Know your worth. And never take someone's house without asking, not the one made of wood, or the one made of soul." She reached forward and turned the camera off. She didn't cry. That afternoon, she walked through the guest house one last time before listing it. The place was filled with clean air and memory. The mural on the back wall gleamed. The tea kettle sat ready on the burner. The new mattress still held its firmness. She adjusted a framed print by the door. Yasmin had made it, a silhouette of a home cradled in 2 hands, beneath the words, "What holds us, frees us." At 3 p.m., the new tenant arrived. A woman in her 50s, slight and soft-spoken, with a suitcase that looked older than either of them. Her name was Cheryl. She wore her gratitude not as performance but as posture, upright, careful, present. "I read the guidelines twice," she said. "And the mission. I'll honor this space." Rose nodded, then smiled, gently, firmly. "This is a home," she said, "not a favor. Treat it like both." Cheryl's eyes welled, but she said nothing. She just nodded once. As she carried her bag inside, Rose watched the door close behind her, not as an ending, but a continuation. That night, Rose brewed chamomile tea, sliced an apple, and carried both upstairs. Her bedroom smelled of lavender and cedar. The wind chimes outside clicked gently in the dark. She changed into soft cotton, locked the door, not out of fear, but as a ritual of peace, and pulled her journal from the nightstand. The last page was waiting. She opened it, wrote the final line beneath the neat list of logs and plans and phrases that had rebuilt her. "I stayed quiet long enough." Then she capped the pen. Outside, the wind rustled the apricot leaves, brushing their shadows across the window pane. Inside, Rose lay back against the pillows, the warmth of the tea still lingering in her hands. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in decades, she fell asleep not defending her space, but belonging fully inside it.